Welcome back to Powered by Play. I'm Drew, and I'm a professor of theater at Chapman University in Southern California.
I'm Avery, and I'm a theatrical scenic designer. Every month on this podcast, we explore what we play, how we play, and why we play.
We believe play powers us, and that's what makes it powerful.
All right, Drew.
All right, Avery.
Press play.
This month on Powered by Play, we will do the thing that's expected and celebrate February with playing romance and desire. And yes, we will have something to say, or perhaps quite a bit to say, about Valentine's Day. It's intentional here that we are not doing playing love, because there are many kinds of love, and this month we want to explore these particular dimensions of love. So, what is behind humans wanting to play at romance and desire? How do we playfully rehearse what we want from a romantic partner? How do we express our desire in playful ways? And what aspects of desirous play might be just for us, and what are to be shared? And Avery, before we begin talking about our sort of childhood conceptions, I did look at the etymology of the word romance or romantic. And in the Middle Ages, this term referred to stories that were in vernacular, not the high language of Latin, but in the vernacular languages of the various groups that were in Europe at the time. So these stories in vernacular typically involved knights or courtly folks having adventures, and later the stories focused on the pursuit of lasting love based on mutual attraction. And this is kind of where the word, as we would use it today, began. And it sort of began with Geoffrey Chaucer defining it. And so that's sort of where we are today when we think of the word romance or romantic. It meant something very different back in the Middle Ages, but now we have a particular conception. So why don't we begin at the beginning, as we often do? Avery, what was it like playing these aspects of life when you were a kid?
I think before I ever watched any cartoons or movies or books, as we usually start, I think we started out with giving each other Valentines in grade school. And I had a smaller class size in some of my grades, and then I had a larger class size in some other schools that I went to. But every year in Valentine's Day, we were expected to put together 15 to 30 different little notes and candies to individually give to all of our classmates. And I, like many others, would choose our favorite ones of those Valentines, and or we would write like our crush's name in like the very best handwriting, or our best friend's name in also wonderful handwriting, or like give our favorite candies to our best friends too. And so just kind of like favoritizing different people that we had more connections with or that we wanted to impress more. I remember I had like Littlest Pet Shop themed Valentines one day or one year. I think another year I had ones that it had like a little robot and had like a little mini game in it. And nowadays I think sometimes I get one or two Valentines on the day, just because it's like, I guess it's a tradition, it's a little ritual that we've all developed for ourselves. But I actually really liked back then when it was just like for everybody to just celebrate love and connection to other people rather than just focusing on your one true love. But when I read books, my favorite aspects of kind of romance were included as a subplot in more adventure stories. Percy Jackson series was probably the most notable for me, where the protagonists, Percy and Annabeth, they have quite an iconic love story where they start out as friends, they work through a bunch of quests and monster slaying and adventures together, and then finally at the end, after they save the world, they have an underwater kiss, and then the rest is history. but they have like a lot of sarcastic banter. She like teases him a lot. Like she calls him seaweed brain in like a teasing way. And they also go through like hell itself, and they get hurt fighting all these monsters, and like they fight like the gods and titans for each other. Like it gets really intense. And then they also just like have that subplot of like connection and romance sometimes as well. But I was really drawn to like A, I'm really drawn to adventure stories, but B, because there was a lot of romance embedded in a lot of these, I became very enticed by the combination of romance with adventure for myself. And when you mentioned like the etymology of the word, it's funny that in French the word roman is the word for novel, which also originates from the same like vernacular that you mentioned. But I think deeper than just like the fantasy of enjoyment and playing, there's also a lot of honestly like childhood trauma that's tied up with this also. Like I recently read the book called Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents by Lindsay C. Gibson. First of all, I believe this is required reading for any adult out there. But it basically addresses people who have emotionally immature, unavailable, or selfish parents who cause their children to have lingering feelings of anger, loneliness, betrayal, or abandonment. And you might recall your childhood as a time when your emotional needs were not met, when your feelings were dismissed, or when you took on adult levels of responsibility in order to compensate for your parents' behavior. And this book is about these wounds and healing these wounds in order to move forward with your life. And one thing they mention is role selves, which is essentially a fantasy that you construct for yourself to cope with your unmet emotional needs. So I related a lot to having parents that did not emotionally meet my needs growing up. And I created a role self where I would just be, and this is like middle school or high school or whatever. I would just be sitting in a library and someone across the way in the fashion of a book sense. Like they would notice me, they'd fall in love with me and want to spend the rest of their lives with me. Like I had this fantasy growing up as a kid that romance is the way for me to get my emotional needs met. And that was like it can become unhealthy if you bring it up to like a very serious degree, which I fortunately did not. But even sometimes now, like, and it's such like a instinctual thing that my childhood self did was like, oh, I can get my emotional needs met outside of my house through adventuring out and saving the world with somebody that I bond with. Isn't that just such a fascinating way that romance has shown up in my life, Drew? It's so weird.
I love that. I totally get it. Oh my gosh, because in all those stories that we grew up with, it was almost like the byproduct was a romantic connection. Star Wars, Han and Leia. It was, and that one I remember very specifically because of the famous scene when Han is going to be frozen in carbonite and Leia finally breaks through the Imperial Guard sort of holding her and she says, "I love you." And of course, Han says, "I know." And I just,
Hmm.
oh my gosh, because of course he knew. Of course he knew that he had gotten to a point where his adventuring with her, his keeping her safe, would mean that she would love him. So, oh my gosh, absolutely 100% adventure and romance put together.
Yeah.
And I also think when I was a kid, I used to watch James Bond movies
Mm.
with my dad and with my neighbors sometimes. And iconically, every end of a James Bond movie was James Bond having saved the day, everything was fine, and then he was with whatever Bond girl was there for the end of the movie, and they started kissing or they sort of went down under the frame of the camera. And so absolutely, and because love is romance is an adventure. And I love that those two were sort of put together in your mind. I remember when I was at school, we had this, I don't know whether it was still going around as a playground sort of rhyme when you were a kid, Avery, but it was this person and this person, this person and this person sitting in a tree. Kissing. First comes love, then comes marriage, then comes the baby in the baby carriage. Okay, was that still around when you were a kid?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so that just apparently will not cycle out of popular children's culture. But
Yeah.
that was, and oh my gosh, if someone was saying that about you, you knew that you were in the spotlight with this particular person and they were like putting you together with this person.
Yeah.
And it was sort of, you walked around having sort of dread that they would say this about you and you would be in this rhyme.
Mm-hmm. That reminds me of when I was in middle school once, and my friends knew that I had a crush on somebody, and they were like, "I dare you to go and give them a hug," and like I have a vivid memory of me doing that and just retreating back once I did it and just like
Oh, of
embarrassed. And
course.
I think like the game of it all, as you go through grade school, it's so simple yet weird when you look back on it, but, like, you know what? That's what kids kinda do, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was always heterosexual.
Yeah.
I was a kid who was always putting a boy together with a girl that they could see as a couple.
Yeah.
And so it was very strict
Yeah.
and defined.
I also remember in kindergarten, I think my older sister taught me how to write in a diary, and I think one day she would also proofread my diary as a kindergartner. I don't know. Anyway, I was like, I have a crush on Ava, and Ava's a girl, and my sister was like, oh my gosh, no, you can't have a crush on another girl if you're born a girl, silly. And then I was like, oh, and then I just like accepted that for like a while until she and I both learned more about queerness and we were like, "Oh, wait, no, that's wrong." But like even the it's just like such the raw organic way that kids teach each other what crushes are and what romance is supposed to look like that is so fascinating. Sometimes harmful, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then there were toys and games as a kid that were involved with trying to figure this out. My sister had Barbie dolls, and I can't remember if she had a Ken doll or not, but I remember her friends and just kind of other girls of the time taking the Barbie and Ken dolls and trying to figure out how you kissed someone by making Barbie and Ken kiss. Or rehearsing, do you want to go on a date, Ken? Yes, I do, Barbie, and that kind of thing. I remember girls of the time rehearsing with those dolls in that fashion. There was also this board game, again, I don't know if it was still out when you were a kid. It was called Mystery Date.
I don't think I played this one.
Oh my gosh. And it was marketed toward girls. And the idea was which of the boys was going to show up and be your mystery date. And would this person be compatible? And if I'm remembering correctly, it had a door that you sort of opened, and that was the boy who showed up at the door. And it was kind of crazy, but that was interesting. Again, rehearsing for what you were going to need when you started getting asked out on dates, I suppose. Nowadays, there's a board game called Marrying Mr. Darcy, which is the good old Jane Austen slash Bronte's Regency stuff. I'll have a lot to say about that later, but the idea of it kind of like Mystery Date, which of these men do you, as one of the sisters, want to go after and why? And how many points will you get if you secure a proposal from that man? And then there's Love Letter. Have you played Love Letter?
No.
Okay. It's this little tiny game where you're trying to get a letter to the princess. And so you are working your way up to the princess by moving through like people who are lower in the nobility. And hopefully, if you get someone with a high enough number, they're going to be able to pass on the letter. And there are now all kinds of different versions of it. But it's this little game about giving a token of your affection. And then All right, I suppose we should take a moment to talk about MFK. And I first became aware of this game, I don't know, what, like 10 years ago or something? And it's gotten so far in pop culture that now there's a card game version of it. All right, I'm going to say this. I will straight out say I really don't ever want to assign anyone to kill. It is very, very hard. And then I always have a hard time figuring out, okay, who's the M and who's the F? And what if the person I really want as the M knows that I assigned this person to F? And what if I assign this person to F, but then that goes really well and I want to move them to M, and this person that I had in M, I no longer know if I want there. And this is a game that causes me a great deal of stress. So I'm going to hand that right over to you, Avery, and see what you think about this.
That's so funny. Um, I recently passed a YouTube thumbnail video that was like smash or pass, and it was just like all the dragons from How to Train Your Dragon.
Ah, yeah!
So funny. Like people play these smash or pass games with like so many genres of things. It's ridiculous. Like anything that you can imagine, people will. It's so ridiculous. But I think there's a lot of like reason that we like to gamify, romance and dating, because sometimes you can break it down into a game like this. Like there are dating simulators, like as video games where you just play a character who's romancing other characters. So like Monster Prom is one of them. You're a monster character at a monster high school and you gotta ask somebody to prom. So you have like different stats that you can keep gaining more of. So like smarts or boldness or creativity or charm or fun or money. Like those are the six stats that you can gain more of in order to romance specific kinds of characters. And they're all really quirky and they've all got like really cool like character designs because they're all monsters. And there's also a hidden affection stat that you don't know about, so that impacts your standings on which of the dateable characters that you're going to be able to succeed or fail with. And similarly, there's Dream Daddy Dating Simulator, where you are a dad and your goal is to meet and romance other hot single dads because you and your daughter actually moved into this neighborhood where all of your neighbors are hot single dads. And what more could you want in some kind of a game like this? And even with more like in-depth games like Baldur's Gate, of course, this is a notorious one lately for having a very, very well done romance system. So it's a 3D, D&D-esque roleplay video game, and you have real-time exploration of the world with turn-based combat, and all of your decisions and dialogue impact the rest of the story. And all of these romanceable characters come from different backgrounds. They have a lot of character development. Over time, they reveal their backstories and their insecurities like real people. Like it's getting as realistic as you can be in a fantasy realm of romance. And you, as the player and character, you can be a perfect supportive partner, or you can be cold, distant friends with benefits, and everything in between, and even hurt other people's feelings in the process. And you can also talk about whether you're going to be exclusive or not, and how the other characters feel about that. Like it feels like the characters in this story are very like alive and they can be conflicted with how they see the world by the way that you interact with the world. Like they watch you and like whether you are kind or whether you're mean or whether you kill innocents or not. And you can sway the other characters to kind of like agree with you or like you more or not. And you can also take a risk and like trust them to do the right thing later too. It's just like the choices matter so much in this game, and also there's so many choices that like it's just such a phenomenally designed piece of artwork, and notoriously just a lot of just very horny characters basically. But that's what I like about this kind of a game, is that it's not just about the romance. Like I like games that do have like the focus on a plot and a story, and that the romance is just a subplot.
Yeah, and then if you look at real life, and you talked about the gamifying or gamification of romance or desire, the idea of dating apps, and I know you'll have a great deal to say about those in a minute, but the idea of You swipe, you swipe. Oh, okay. Yes, this person, you swipe the other way. And who are you going to message? And are you going to wait for that person to message you back before sending another message? I mean, it's not in person, so it becomes very 2D, and we'll have more to say about 2D and 3D in a little bit. But it sort of becomes a game of, all right, which character did you make contact with? And which character possibly are you going to move forward and have a story with? So that's kind of interesting. But prior to, I mean, if you look all the way back at arranged marriages or at matchmakers, I'm thinking of, oh my gosh, whole Mulan song about, is it "You'll Bring Honor to Us All"? Is that what the song is when
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
matchmakers are there? Oh my gosh.
Mm.
Like the idea of, oh, you two would be good, right? We know better than you. And so we are going to put you together in this situation. And I sort of think that's fascinating. And what do you do if you are not okay? If the people that sort of thought this will be a good match were incorrect. And the power dynamics there are sort of interesting.
Yeah.
But I suppose we should return to dating apps. Okay. All right, Avery, let it rip.
Well, actually, one more thing about the marriage thing too
Oh,
is
yeah,
that
yeah,
it's
yeah.
so fascinating that back in the beginnings of marriage, it was not really about the romance, right, Drew? Because it was mostly about it was about like the honor and the family and the like just
Yes.
literally having children and like increasing property and legacy. Like it was not really about the romance, and it wasn't really until I think Victorian times ish when the spheres of like the personal and the private and the public and the business started to like become separate, and and their culture started to develop romance novels and develop the idea that marriage could be something more than just like a business partnership. So
Yeah, and my guess
yeah.
would be because that was the period when in Western society the middle class was developing.
Yeah.
And so no longer were you either a noble who married for a title, power, money, whatever it was, or someone sort of in the working class who married so that you could have someone to have kids with so they would help with everything that needed to happen. But the middle class was like, oh, wait a minute. We can marry for actual passion. And because we got enough money to insulate us from desperation, but we have, and that will allow us, but we don't have so much money that we need to make sure that we are keeping it in a noble family or whatever. That would be my guess. But yeah, I
Yeah.
think right around like the early modern period into the Victorian period, that
Yeah.
was when the sort of passion was starting to make its way onto
Mm.
the stage.
Yeah. But yeah, anyway, about dating apps, I can't even comprehend what it might be like to have grown up without them, True, because they're such like as a 24-year-old, they're just so like ingrained into my generation. And like I'm glad that I've always had like a critical lens on them, and I've been able to see how and like even watch video essays and articles about like dating apps turn people into the products. So like you're always wondering like, well, how do they make their money? They make their money by selling people to each other, and they thrive off of dopamine, which is like the anticipation of reward. Like when people open up a dating app, like that's what they feel. Like they feel that excitement, they have that anticipation, and that's what causes them to like feel like they need to spend more money in order to keep playing the game. Like nobody makes any money if nobody plays the game, right? And the app uses algorithms to control to control what access people have to each other. And they keep this algorithm secret so that they can just use you for their money making. And hey, if you want more access and more power, give them a ton of money, and then you'll have that. But the best way that I've used dating apps is just to use them to like meet a person and then like meet in person as soon as you can, because that's how you really know if you're compatible with somebody, is that you have that in-person connection or not. Like when people get sucked into it and just with like all the swiping and all the messaging and like get lost in that tunnel, that just it just like loses first of all, you're just losing your power to this corporate system, and also you're losing track of what your goal should be in the first place. Like, your goal should be just to like meet somebody that you might have a connection with. And I think it's such a sinister way that our modern use of technology has kind of turned upon us. Like, we don't really write love letters in pen and paper anymore or mail it to each other. I mean, we should, but like nowadays, everything's faster, everything's instantaneous, and like we want so much instantaneously that we're willing to like give our money and our time to like these apps that don't have our best interests in mind. But yeah, soapbox over.
Yay for soapboxes. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I totally understand, and I remember meeting my partner on an app and sort of going, "Oh, okay, I can learn this about this person," and having actually quite a few messages back and forth before we met up in person. And you're right, that is the sort of the watershed moment of, okay, this is, I've seen images of you, I've seen text that you've created. Now that we're in the same room together and we are actually talking to each other without being able to curate what we write and without being able to choose, oh, well, this shot of me makes me look really buff or whatever,
Yeah.
this is when we really understand what it means to be together, sharing a moment, and can we have conversation? Can we still look into each other's eyes and feel like there is a possibility, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is a future. And sort of thinking about the fantasy aspect of, you were talking about, it creates the dopamine, right? So where does this dopamine come from, and how are we taught what it would mean to be together with someone? How do we sort of create a fantasy for ourselves that then we attempt to turn into reality, right? Bridgerton is the case study I'm going to bring up now. So, Bridgerton and other shows like it, but this one in particular is an example of what does it mean to be in a group of people trying to find someone. Each of the Bridgerton kids is looking for a good match. And what does that good match mean? It might mean something for each one of them. I also think of Fiddler on the Roof, and each one of the sisters, what is she looking for? And what is that going to mean for her relationship with her family? So, Bridgerton and this whole idea of, I'm a member of a family that is going to be in the season, that is going to be making the rounds through these parties and these dances and these events that are held. And for the women, they have a dance card that then the men sort of claim a dance. And I'm not exactly sure if the girls can say, no, I don't want you to claim a dance with me. That's not especially clear to me. It's fascinating because, and I do, but okay, but Avery, I do love the idea of dance being a part of this and conversation being a part of this. So, as we were talking about dating apps, it's almost like perhaps Bridgerton was really interesting to people because it was like the anti dating app, right?
Mm-hmm.
They began in person.
Mm-hmm.
They began by seeing each other. They began by having to talk to each other and having to dance with each other. And I think that was perhaps something fascinating and something that people grabbed onto.
That makes a
And
lot of sense.
yeah, so the whole idea of fantasy and reality, or fantasy and authenticity. I think you have something to say about reality TV. Do you not?
Yeah, I've never watched that much, but I did some research for this episode. So, reality TV shows where you have to like find your match or whatever, like The Bachelor, 90 Day Fiancé, Love Island, Love is Blind, so many more. There's countless. It's ridiculous. But they center the drama on this show. So the producers and the creators all stage a way for these participants to play a game that they can win. And they perpetuate the idea that this is love. Like, love is supposed to be a roller coaster of emotions, and this is good. Like, this is amazing. And they have such dramatic music in reality TV shows. Oh my gosh. And it's always at like the most dramatic times ever, and just builds, and then like somebody says something and like the beat drops, and then like there's so many like hidden messages of like who's actually represented on screen, who's not represented, like whose identities are actually going to be shown, who's going to be ignored, and who's going to be turned into the villain or the hero of these stories. And there was a so Wong Fu Productions is an Asian American film crew in Los Angeles, and years ago they made like a skit that was like, what if all of the bachelors on The Bachelorette were Asian? And they had like so many jokes of like how, all the seasons of The Bachelorette or The Bachelor, like there were just so few or non-existent Asian males on there, and like calling out the societal biases that we have in Hollywood and media of like always starring white people as the heroes and the love interests and such. So like reality TV is not a place for like critical analysis and whatever. Like there's so many drawn out, repetitive and formulaic parts of it, but like I have friends who really enjoy watching guilty pleasure series like these with their friends, because reality TV love is just its own genre. It's like a fantasy that masquerades as reality in a way where you can escape to this universe that is such a train wreck that it can make your own life look like a walk in the park. And I don't think there's a better way to portray, what it's like to kind of watch this. It's almost like this also all reminds me of like Shrek, where the story is of like an ugly quote unquote protagonist who's like villainized, and he's not the Prince Charming that Fiona or even society expects, but like that movie series like twists the narrative, and it calls out society for being shallow and for being discriminatory, basically. And I think, Shrek is such a phenomenal example of like honestly true love, like of finding somebody that you bond with over your character, and there's drama around it, but mostly because society is a jerk to you. And I don't know, there's so many different, like you have Shrek on one side and then you have reality TV love on the other side. And then on the third side, you have something that's like 50 Shades of Grey, where and even like Twilight as well. But like the harmful way that 50 Shades of Grey perpetuates rape culture and abuse is just so annoying to me, that like it has become so mainstream and so like appreciated or whatever by people. But like this entire relationship between the two characters, like Christian Grey and Anna Anastasia or whatever, like he stalks her, he controls her behaviors and her food intake, he dictates who she spends time with, he isolates her, he threatens her and blames her, like textbook abuse. It's ridiculous. And it's to the point where she is hurt, she's afraid of making him angry, and like she is a textbook victim of abuse. And like having the story series like this, it can teach people that pain and humiliation are erotic, and that this is what like girls want. Like girls want a man who can control and intimidate and threaten. And like that's also like a similar thing with like Twilight that I've seen of those characters of like I I like of just like romanticizing, harmful aspects of something that is not even that's not romance, and it's not even healthy. Like romanticizing abuse, it's ridiculous. And so like I also see those kinds of threads in common, like with reality TV and like with 50 Shades of Grey. Like reality TV, sometimes those characters on there like are like controlling and manipulative to other people, and like that's not something that I want society to romanticize. Like that's not what I want people to walk away with thinking is okay, and it's so frustrating sometimes.
Yeah, I think a lot of this, we're connecting the idea of power with the idea of choice. And Oh, look at how many options I have. Look at how many men or women I could give the rose to, right? And good old Stephanie Meyer and good old Suzanne Collins. So if you look at Twilight and you look at Hunger Games, and they're by no means the only ones, but the idea of having two equally hot and complicated and into the girl guys pursuing the girl who's at the center of Twilight and Hunger Games. I okay, again, once again I have to give a shout out to my sister here, who I don't know if she created this phrase, but I love this phrase. And the phrase is, "Oh my goodness, author, your issues are showing." Right? It's what is the deal with two grown women authors fantasizing about being a young woman, sort of really okay. I'll bring Britney Spears into the mix now. Not a girl, not yet a woman, and yet has these two choices that are equally, and she's going to have to make a choice. That's one aspect of this, right? There is no thruple in any of these young adult stories, but the protagonist has to make a choice. And then, oh my gosh, there was this whole Team Edward or Team, can't remember the werewolf's
Jacob,
name.
I think.
Yes, Jacob. Thank you. Thank you, Avery. Team Edward or Team Jacob. And I just think it's tied to this idea of choice. Like, to have power is to have choice. And this goes into fantasy as well. I mean, this is why I think people get enticed by porn. This is why people get enticed by erotica, or people get enticed by anime, right? Anime, shall we say, of a certain genre. The idea that, oh, you could potentially have this character or have someone be as into you as this character seems to be. And that fantasy is very, very strong. Oh my gosh. And the whole sort of game of who is your celebrity crush, or who would be your hall pass, like who would be the one person that you could cheat on your partner for. There's something about this, as funny and fun as it seems. There's something about it that's just a little bit, okay, I'm going to say it. I hope this doesn't make me sound too, like, you know, conservative, but there's a little disrespect that comes with that. A little bit of, I'm even thinking about, if I had access to this person, I would be so over there and away from you, person I've spent all this time with, have invested all this time with, have developed over weeks, months, years, right? A deep, romantic, desirous, and fundamental, whatever it is, deep love connection with. But if this person walked in, I would say, see ya. Gonna be gone for a few hours. I don't know, but
Yeah.
there's just this. So I guess I'm asking the question: what is the space of fantasy in the idea of an actual relationship, both romantic fantasy and just straight up desire fantasy? How much fantasy is appropriate? How much is it appropriate to think about, oh, I'm going to have this in my mind when we are together in moments of desire or passion? Where does, how do I stay rooted in who we are to each other, and how do I allow or disallow other elements of fantasy to enter the moment? Just kind of
Yeah.
interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, and it's so inescapable that the way society sells you of like having a soulmate, or like you have to do these certain rituals on these certain days, like all the holidays around romance. I know Valentine's Day is, you're going to talk about this, and that is like the romance holiday, but like the amount of Christmas rom-coms that I've like watched for fun with my friends this season has been ridiculous. And like one specific Christmas series that I watched a couple years ago was called Dash and Lily, which was based on a book by Rachel Kahn and David Levithan. And so Lily is a 17-year-old girl. She loves Christmas, but she craves romantic love and is extra lonely with her family out of town for the holidays. Meanwhile, Dash is a teenager who hates Christmas, but he follows the adventures that Lily's Book of Dares ensues as they exchange the notebook in secret places around New York City before they finally meet. They have a connection, they have an argument, they break up for a bit, but then they realize that they want to be together, and then they be together, like, for Christmas. And my main issue with the series is that the plot revolves around the issue that Lily doesn't have a boyfriend. Like, she, as a character, like,
Mm.
that's her main like goal, and that's her main flaw that she thinks is going on. But I believe that the character's true issue is that she believes that she needs a boyfriend at all to be happy, and that she believes that Christmas is such a big important romantic deal when, you know, you can center it around whatever you want. Like, just because you've been sold this idea over your entire life that Christmas is like for romance and kissing under mistletoe and like snuggling up with someone sexy, just because you're sold all this doesn't mean that you have to subscribe to it. And if you want to be free from like this feeling of suffering that you have to like let go of that and just, you know, love yourself and your friends and your family and your community and turn to things other than romance if you don't have a hot boy next to you. Like, you'll be okay. All of society and movies and whatever, like, they sell so much to us. Like, they sell, like, you have one soulmate, or like you have to be with one person for the rest of your life. And like, who's the one person that you're gonna kiss under the mistletoe? Who are you gonna kiss on New Year's Eve? Who are you gonna kiss on Valentine's Day? Like, stop caring about who I'm kissing and like stuff like that. Just like, just forget about it. You know, do more important stuff. It's so annoying.
Oh my gosh. Oh, the Christmas rom-coms. Yes, yes, my partner and I watched quite a few of those, including the new Hot
Yeah,
Frosty.
also watched that too. It was, oh my god, the predatoriness
Oh,
of that.
yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh. And now there's like a Hallmark Christmas movie universe
Oh yeah.
because the character, the actress in Hot Frosty was also in Mean Girls. And so Lindsay Lohan comes up on a show that she's watching, I think, in another Hallmark movie. And she says, "Oh, that girl looks familiar. I feel like I know her." So there's this whole share. Oh my gosh, it's a thing. It's a thing. It's a thing. But yeah, okay, all right. Valentine's Day. So, okay. Listeners, hoping that you are all set for whatever kind of Valentine's Day or Galentine's Day or Palentine's Day you want this February, but let's look at this. All right, so it begins in the Middle Ages, and it is a feast day associated with romantic love, but it evolved from the Roman Lupercalia festival, which was a festival, as far as I was able to discern, where folks were paired up to increase the population. And there were aspects of this that apparently had men going after women with strips of animal flesh and putting blood on them to indicate that they were going to be there.
Yikes.
This is not your pretty red hearts and candy Valentine's Day kind of thing. But it became associated with the feast of Saint Valentine. So the Roman Saint Valentine, whose name comes from valens, worth or strength, was killed and buried on February 14th. So when everybody's doing this stuff about you're the one that I want and I'm going to be with you and love you, you're celebrating someone who was killed and buried on this day. And there are stories about this particular saint officiating secret marriages or sending a young girl a note when he knew he was going to be martyred from your Valentine. So, not exactly sure what's going on. Hey, side note, Avery, I find this really interesting. Like the two saints who have become more than sort of their saint's day, Saint Patrick and Saint Valentine. So
Mhm.
this is big. Like I can't think of any other saint whose day is associated with something as big as like what these two saints got.
Mhm.
I suppose that's a story for another time. And so we have all these associations with things like Cupid. Cupid, the little baby flying around baby, was changed from the Greek god of love, Eros. Not exactly sure how Eros became a baby, shooting arrows to indicate that someone was love struck, and the idea of hearts. Hearts have always been associated with passion and emotion because I suppose that's where we feel it. We feel our heart racing, we feel our blood pumping, whatever it is. But so the heart has been associated with that, but the symbol, the first occurrence of the symbol of a heart, like the one that we are familiar with, was found in a French manuscript from the Middle Ages where a man is offering his heart to his lover. So I kind of thought that was interesting. So Valentine's Day, yes, now has become. Avery, what has this become?
A mess?
A mess! A way of making money? I mean,
Oh, yeah, no, just a capitalistic mess. And it's every holiday in the US actually. Like that's why I don't really celebrate any US holidays because
yeah.
every single time they just change out the aisles in the grocery stores like on a clockwork.
Oh,
And
heck
like
yeah.
just selling teddy bears and chocolates and all of that, and then the next day afterwards, it's all on sale because it's all expendable, and they only had them prices that way in the first place just to prey on your need. And then and then people like they don't communicate about what they want, and then they're like, "Oh, you didn't buy me flowers or a teddy bear on Valentine's Day, even though I wanted it." Like you have to communicate. Like there's so much that's like again like the fantasy of like, "Oh, you don't have to communicate with your partner in order to get what you want." Like, no, that's a fantasy. You need to communicate with your partner what you want to do on certain days. You can't just expect them to like know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think this kind of shifts into what we're talking about with authenticity, right? So how do you show up authentically to yourself and to another person who you are with?
Yeah.
What is spoken? What can be expressed? What is inexpressible? Right? Ineffable. All right. Okay. Authenticity. So here I'm going to look at two singers of the moment who have I am going to argue two ways of being authentic with the person that you are interested in. So please welcome to the stage Taylor Swift and Chapel Rowan.
Oh, wow.
And all right, Taylor is all about, I believe, so this is me just going through Taylor's, collected works and
Mhm.
saying this is what I see Taylor saying about authenticity. Authenticity is about depth, about commitment, about actually seeing the person and being seen, right? And Taylor is looking for someone who can be that person for her. And Taylor's also kind of disappointed when things don't work out. I suppose I should say, to say the least. Taylor is disappointed when things don't work out, but Taylor is going to get back in there and back in the mix and keep looking. And there's something about Taylor that I feel like we are trying to share something and show, not me and Taylor specifically, and no, Taylor Swift is not a celebrity crush that I have, drawing from earlier. Taylor, to me, is saying that it is that desire and romance and deep love and commitment can be found, right? And somewhere are out there, and if it takes a while to find them, then it takes a while to find them. Chapel Roan. Chapel Roan seems to me like authenticity is about being true to yourself and not apologizing and finding someone who's on the same page, and then if that is not quite working out, moving on to the next person who you're going to see is on the same page, but never never setting yourself aside, always paying attention to who you want and being authentic to yourself. And I'm telling you, Avery, there are moments where I am absolutely like, you know what? You can take me. I am hot to go. Let's try this out. It's time. Let's see what happens. And I have to hand it to you, Chapel Roan, in addition to sharing my name. I have to hand it to Chapel. I think that she has created a wonderful sort of sense of don't don't apologize, don't try to be someone who people are telling you should be, and perhaps also be respectful of people who are not going to be on the same page. You can be absolutely hot to go, find someone who wants you because you are hot to go, right? So okay, I just wanted to throw that out there.
I love how playful she is with all that too.
Oh, absolutely. And did you see her performance? What was it at the VMAs?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Where she was like a freaking archer knight, bringing down like a castle full of people. Oh, with Good Luck Babe. That was Good Luck Babe, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I could do a whole thing on Chapel Roan, but over to you, Avery.
Yeah. For me, authenticity is vulnerability. A lot of the more authentic pieces of love media that I like to listen to includes Modern Love, which is a podcast by the New York Times. It's just about the complicated lives of real people. And also Where Should We Begin with Esther Perel. It's very raw, very intimate. Like, you just sit in on a therapy session with a couple. Like, from breakups to open relationships to workplace conflicts and family fractures. Like, you get to hear what a couple is going through and you are there with them through it. And similarly, there's a movie called Past Lives directed by Celine Song that came out in the last couple years. And there's two childhood friends who are, I think they're from Korea, and they're reunited in New York, even though one of them is married now. But like, the childhood friend doesn't come in to like tear her away and be like, I'm here now, I'm ready for you now, let's go divorce your husband and let's get married because we actually are meant to be together. Like, all three of them have this very powerful scene where they're like sitting around and talking about their feelings and questions about destiny, and like there's a language barrier between them, and then like life goes on, albeit with like some crying and emotions, but like the childhood friend goes home and then like they continue their life. And I find authenticity is vulnerability because that's what needs to happen in order to have a actually strong relationship, is that you need to be communicative of all of your best feelings, but just as equally all of your worst. And like, even in non-monogamy communities, they're always like, have a monthly check-in, have a yearly check-in, like have a business meeting where you sit down and talk about how the relationship is going, what you want to improve, what goals you have, what you both can do better, and what you're looking forward to. And the message behind all this is just that love and desire and romance are like, the best way for that to exist is for it to be communicative and collaborative. That's how you actually have a sustainable relationship.
Yeah, and to that extent, it's both play and work.
Yeah. And even with like BDSM too, it's also extremely collaborative and communicative. And in BDSM, the word play describes a wide variety of kinky activities. Like, you can have light play, hard play, edge play. Like, there's all kinds of things that you can do consensually to, your players in these scenes, and it has to be structured and consensual and discussed beforehand. Like, you can't just swoop in with a whip and handcuffs and be like, this is what we're doing now. Like, because BDSM can be dangerous, you need to have safe words, you need to have discussions with all parties of consenting to what's going to happen and what people want to happen, because it's play. Like, you want to be playing in a scene that you want to be part of, and in order for that to happen, you have to communicate and you have to be aware of like what you want, what you don't want, and work together as a team.
Yeah, and it's interesting that spaces in which BDSM is experimented with or experienced are typically called dungeons. And dungeons suggest maybe torture, maybe control, but it's interesting that all of the rituals, and so, in other words, things that are unsafe, things that would hurt. And obviously, there's an element of pain or an element of discomfort associated typically with BDSM. I mean, that's kind of, that's what it says on the box. And so a dungeon, I suppose, is an interesting piece of nomenclature. And it's just sort of fascinating to me. And there are all these, I mean, looking at sexual play or play and desire, there are sort of these childlike words and tropes like dolls or toys or an outfit that's a baby doll outfit or a schoolgirl outfit or a cheerleader outfit or calling someone daddy. I mean, all of these things have to do with sort of childhood and the things going back to the Barbies that I was talking about my sister having, right? So, toys, dolls, all of this is going back to a very early sort of this is how we make sense of the world. And perhaps toys, games, dolls help make sense of desire or enact desire with a person or people in a way that reflects childhood and learning through play. I'm not exactly sure, but it strikes me that those words exist. There's also this idea of dirty and the idea that dirty talk or kinks or I don't know, like the idea of what do we mean by dirty when we're talking about desirous play, and suddenly dirty becomes something you want. Dirty becomes something that's not only okay but desirable, and that's sort of fascinating as well. Like, okay, is it because this is a corner of our life that is only explored in certain aspects and at certain times, and everything else is quote unquote clean? And then if we're sort of going down the rabbit hole of desire or sexuality, is there a place where we kind of get dirty because of, is it society that says this is dirty? Is it us? I don't know. Really, just really interesting words.
Mhm.
And before we have our sort of final thoughts, I went to a poet, Khalil Gibran, and I found this really cool poem that I kind of wanted to, before we have our last questions, I wanted to share this poem. Okay, ready, Avery?
Yep, ready.
All right. Love has no other desire but to fulfill itself. But if you love and must needs have desires, let these be your desires. To melt and be like a running brook that sings its melody to the night. To know the pain of too much tenderness. To be wounded by your own understanding of love, and to bleed willingly and joyfully. To wake at dawn with a winged heart and give thanks for another day of loving. To rest at the noon hour and meditate love's ecstasy, to return home at eventide with gratitude, and then to sleep with a prayer for the beloved in your heart and a song of praise upon your lips. So maybe that's aspirational. Maybe that's what all of this play is trying to find. I don't know whether it's momentary or whether it's lifelong, and whether it's shared or whether it's personal. I hope that we have raised some questions about how play might factor into these very, very strong human traits that we have. What do you think?
I love that love and romance and desire are such universal emotions, and that we can apply the kind of love that our play teaches us about to so many people and so many kinds of things. Like I think that the love that I might have for a community of certain people or certain homes that I move to, certain cities that I become accustomed to over the course of years, and kind of learning what love and such is. It just reminds me of the book What About Love by Bell Hooks, and how like they explore the societal side of that and how it connects to ourselves as our true selves. And that's always the question that we're asking is like, who are our true selves and how do we want to water ourselves so that we flourish in the ways that can also allow others to flourish as well.
Brilliant as always, Avery.
All right. Thank you so much for chatting about this, Drew. This was a lovely time.
Yes, it was. And listeners, we'll be with you next month.
This has been Powered by Play with Avery and Drew. If you've been enjoying this podcast, you can support us online at Ko-fi. That is ko-fi.com/poweredbyplay. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.